pushing so hard. But I was scared, and my earlier pushes to make him talk to me more about it or figure out how to get rid of it had always been met with nods and smiles and promises that it'll be all right. The closer we became, the more protective of him I became, even if it meant giving him tough love to make him see reason and stop the thing that was making him sick. For all you know, that thing is controlling you, manipulating you so you don't want to get rid of it. But I'm telling you, I can see how it's affecting you. You look pale and dark under your eyes. Most nights, you're pouring sweat in your sleep, and I know you're not eating like you used to. He was shaking his head, his eyes lowered. That's bullshit, Thomas. You're getting worse. That thing you do, where you can't think of words sometimes, it's happening way more now. You know, his eyes snapped up to mine, anger flashing briefly across his face.
I'm not stupid. I know it's worse.
The anger passed, replaced with a lost look that made my chest ache.
I'm dealing with it, trying to figure it out, but I don't think it's controlling me. It doesn't even sing to me very often.
I frowned. But listen to what you're saying. Some implanted thing is singing to you? That's not normal. Thomas's face hardened slightly.
None of this is normal. How I got here isn't normal. It's...
He paused, his eyes distant as he struggled for the word before looking down with embarrassment.
It's not controlling me. It helped me. It helped both of us.
I crossed the kitchen and put my hands lightly on his arms as I spoke again. This time more softly. Maybe so. I think you're right about that. But it's not helping you now. It's making you sick. All I'm saying is get someone to look at it. I know you don't want a doctor seeing what's in there, but... He stiffened under my hands.
No, I don't. I don't know how they'll react or who we can trust. I can't risk calling attention to myself. It could lead them right to...
I gripped his arms tighter in frustration. Fuck. You don't even know that there is a them here. Maybe there is, but what's the odds they would ever hear about you getting an X-ray or MRI in this podunk town? He just stared at me.
You don't know them like I do. And maybe I'm wrong, but I don't feel like we're out of danger yet. And maybe this thing in me can help us when the danger comes. I think I'm still meant to have it for now.
Swallowing, he went on.
Maybe it's to help you out of your connection to the tree somehow. You never really told me when you have to go back, or for how long.
It was my turn to feel my cheeks flush. I hated lying to him, even by omission. And I knew there was some hypocrisy in me pushing him to deal with this problem, while I kept stalling on dealing with my own. Maybe if I talked to him about it, we could work together to figure out what. I stepped back from him. No, he had enough to worry about without me adding to it. And if I told him how short the timer was on my time away from the tree, and what it would mean once I got pulled back, he would focus all his energy on trying to get me out of it, putting himself at even more risk. I didn't know what him going back around the tree or inside its tunnels might do to him, what it might awaken inside him, and I didn't want to find out. Thomas read my expression and gave a short nod.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I know my brain doesn't work right sometimes, but I'm not dumb, and I know you're hiding the worst of that from me. So unless you want to tell me what's really going on with you, how about you just...
He stopped, a pained look in his eyes.
I don't want to fight with you. And I know you want to help, but we need to help each other.
He shook his head.
I don't have the right words. I don't know what they are.
I stepped forward again, hugging him silently. There was no point in pushing anymore. Not right now. I'd have to give it time. Try to figure out a way to fix my problem. If there was a fix. But that was the problem. I hadn't completely ignored my connection to the tree in the last few months. I'd spent hours looking for answers in my memories and trying unsuccessfully to find out more about the tree through the internet. I'd even called the woman at the museum, the one that had sent me the picture of Justin. But she'd never heard anything about a weird tree in the front yard. And it became clear after a few minutes of conversation that she thought I was either playing a prank on her or a nut job. I tried to think of clever plans to sever my ties to the tree, but the best thing I could come up with was going back and trying to destroy it. I knew from Justin's attempt just how well that would work. I considered going to the tree and begging it to let me go, but the idea of being near it before I had to terrified me. Who was to say that it wouldn't just keep me then? And how could I guarantee that once it got me back, that it would ever let me go again, like it did Justin? No. The best thing I could do was try to help Thomas be well and safe. Treasure the time I had with him now. If he would just listen. I just wanted to make sure he was okay before I went away. Thomas's note was still in my hand as I stopped on my way to the kitchen. There was something moving on the front porch. It was gone, and then it was there. Gone, and then there. Thomas's shoulder and the edge of the rocking chair he was sitting in. He was back. My chest fluttered slightly as I changed course and went out the front door to see him. He was looking out at the yard, apparently in deep thought. But as I approached, he shifted his gaze to me and offered a smile.
Hey there.
I grinned. Hey, just saw your note. I didn't hear you come back. Or have you gone yet? I saw a brief flicker of something across his face, and then he nodded.
No, I'm back. How are you?
My stomach was beginning to twist in on itself. Something was wrong. Had something happened? Was he feeling sick? Yeah, I'm okay. Just still sleepy. Find everything you were looking for at the store? He stared at me for a second before nodding.
Yeah, I did.
His gaze, which normally made me feel warm and excited and happy, felt hot and uncomfortable on my skin now. It was almost as if he continued as he began to stand up.
Yeah, let me show you what I...
You're not Thomas. The man in front of me froze halfway out of the rocking chair, and when he looked up at me, his smile had become hard and brittle.
Well, shit. That didn't last long. Open up, damn you! I stared at the brick wall as though my concentrated gaze could bore past the barrier through sheer will alone. I'd run my hand over the dark outline of the man a dozen times now, feeling for a questing root or a yielding bit of stone, something that would allow me to push back into those strange tunnels once again. But no. For a while, I'd felt certain that the tree wasn't done with me. Why else was I compelled to return again and again? But it had no use for me at the moment either, and I had moved on, with my help, even, and I knew enough to know that it was a fruitless exercise to make demands upon it now. And why did I want to enter the tunnels again? To try and kill it? To reason with it? To threaten and cajole it until it gave me what I wanted? Or perhaps there was another reason. The guilt that nestled in my belly like a restless seed, rolling my insides and making my new life a life free of all the terrible things that had come before. Tainted. Bitter instead of sweet. A cold, hollow life, plagued by fear and self-loathing, and an inexplicable need to come back to this damn place again and again. I sat down on the bed, clasping my hands to stop them from shaking. It helped, but only outside. Inside, my stomach twisted hard enough to make me wince. My constant passenger was stirring again, reminding me that I didn't belong out here, that I'd bought my supposed liberty with coin that wasn't mine to give, that I would never truly be free. When I slid the last brick home into the wall of Rachel's prison, I'd done it without hesitation. I was full of restless, hungry anger that was driven by righteous indignation and pain. In that rage, it was easy to ignore her relative innocence and everything. She was only there because of me, after all, and hadn't I been planning on tricking her into taking my place since I first met her in this world? The hypocritical aspect of my feelings of betrayal wasn't lost on me, but it seemed very small and unimportant at the time. The anger didn't care about the fairness or morality, you see, only the acquisition and distribution of pain, the brokerage of suffering. The first time I'd known that kind of anger was when I returned to this world and murdered my parents and my brother John. I didn't consider it murder at the time, of course. At worst, it was a kind of delayed self-defense against my years of abuse and abandonment. In the moment, it hadn't felt wrong at all. To the contrary, it felt like I was the moving hand of God. meting out due punishment for the sins of my family. I was no longer powerless and hated. I was strong and righteous and in control But what was I in control of, really? By the time I came back and snuffed out my family while they slept, my own flame was guttering low. I had seen so much horror since I first escaped my own cell and began visiting others of similar design and function. Visiting other versions of myself, many of them dead and more than a handful insane. By the time I came back home, I had already seen close to 50 versions of the evil my family had visited upon me. Out of those worlds, 4 contained versions of me that were still alive and imprisoned in their basement cell. The first was racked with infection and fever. I tried to move him, but he would begin to howl in pain, his ghastly, pale, paper-thin skin tearing at the slightest provocation. I believed he was beyond reason or sanity, but I still held out hope that I could get him into the tunnel and the tree might heal him or open a path to a kinder world where he might still be saved. Gently as I could, I swaddled him in his rotting linens and tried to lift him again. That was when he pressed his hot, cracked lips to my ears with strength I'd thought beyond his ability. His voice was a painful whisper, but I felt every syllable resonate in my head and in my heart. "Free me. Kill me. Please." The linens were already growing wet with new wounds. There might be versions of me that would be disgusted at that, or horrified at the thought of taking a life, even in mercy. But they had not seen the life I'd been given, or worse yet, this pitiful thing that was begging me for release. It was a simple thing to do. A few moments of pressure and he was gone. The next 4, 2 lost to infection and 2 more to insanity, proved even easier. I took no joy or pleasure in killing them, but it did bring me a kind of satisfaction nonetheless, as though I was righting wrongs or saving some small portion of myself, providing new memories of my family's atrocities in other worlds and stoking the flames of that anger that ultimately ended their time in this one. But when it was done and the anger was gone, all I was left with was pain and loneliness and sadness. I was untethered from anywhere or anyone, and for a time I feared I might drift on forever, sustained by the tree but never allowed to find a home or peace or love. When I did find love a few years later, it felt like being truly free for the first time. The joy of it made me foolish. I'd been testing the boundaries of my tether for years and had been growing more sure that the time I was forced to spend within the tunnels corresponded multiplicatively to the time I spent without. But I lied to myself that it wasn't so, or if it had been, that this time would be different, that my love would make it different. I learned otherwise, and with the loss of that love, I felt the last bit of hope and mercy being taken from me as well, leaving a man who could spend years trapped alone without breaking, and hurt others as he had been hurt without feeling the insistent sour pain of guilt at his core. A man who could trap a woman, a very good woman, in his place without a backwards glance. Except, as I ascended the steps of the basement for what I felt sure was the last time, I felt my anger already cooling again. I could hear Rachel calling to me from behind the wall, and all I could think about was my first night in that cell, hands bloody and face raw from crying as I begged my mother to come let me out. I hesitated at the top step, looked back down toward the open doorway that led to the bifurcated room beyond. It was too late to take it back, I told myself. Too late to help her escape. The tree had her now. She could serve her time like I did, and then someday, if she was as clever as I thought, she'd find a replacement as I had. A weight settled on me like the pressure of a gathering storm. In my belly, the first stirrings of that acid guilt began to form. Swallowing hard, I tried to ignore them both as I made the final step upstairs, made it out of the house, out of the town, and even the state. 2 weeks later, I returned. My long life had given me plenty of time for introspection, but I don't know how well I've used it, for I now realize that it was only after I condemned Rachel that I saw myself clearly, finally recognized that I've wholly defined the shapes and contours of my life by its negative spaces, its losses, the betrayal of my family, the various imprisonments from the basement cell to the tunnels of the tree to the constant and limitless expanses of my interior wasteland, a desert of self-loathing, anger, and regret in which nothing good could ever grow. The theft of my only real love and the life I thought I might have with her before the tree taught me the cruelest of its lessons. I had hated the ghost tree for so long. It had no face or voice, and wherever I went, it was there. It was easy to see it as the chief devil of my hell. There were times I even blamed it for my family's sins, for my own. It was easy to ignore that it had kept me young and strong, had freed me from my cell and given me the chance to see hundreds of other worlds, had sustained me even when I didn't want to be sustained. I frequently rebelled at what I felt was a violation, a usurpation of my free will, but it didn't change the fact that the tree hadn't actually done anything to harm me other than bring me back to it from time to time. And that was significant, particularly when it kept me from the life I wanted, but that was also viewing it solely from the lens of my own wants and desires, when clearly I was dealing with an entity whose very nature seemed to imply that it was greater and more important than the happiness of just one man. Perhaps it took some measure of perceived freedom for me to see that clearly. Like a starving animal, at first I would do whatever it took to satisfy my sadness, my anger, my hunger, to be freed from the tree. However, once that hunger was sated, I found what I had dined on far less palatable. My family's lives, Rachel's freedom, the best part of my own soul. These thoughts were always at the forefront of my mind as I'd go back to visit my family's home. I found myself wondering if it had all been worth it, if the life I had won was worth living if I had such a hard time living with myself. What if the tree really was important? What if it needed me? If I could help it? Was there anything I could do in this life more vital than be part of something so wondrous? Every visit, I was tempted to go and visit Rachel in the basement. I wasn't ready to free her, and offering false hope would be cruel. But I remembered that loneliness, the crushing black of that place. In the beginning, you would turn inward, filling your existence with the landscapes and colors of your interior world. But the gravity of the cell was always pressing inward, compressing the outer limits of your imagination, your heart, your soul, driving your interior toward a singularity, a black hole of self. A place of void and inconsistent logic from which no light could ever escape. I didn't want that for her, for anyone else. I told myself that she had escaped into the tunnels and the infinite worlds it provided, or that she had broken through the wall and freed herself weeks or months earlier, but somehow I knew different. Despite my best efforts, I was still tied to that tree, and through that, I had some dim sense of her down there, living and dying as I had, one terribly long moment at a time. I reached the point that I was visiting nearly every day for an hour or so. There was a long dirt access road that ran behind the house, and while it was some distance from the house, its elevation gave a good view of the house and the massive red and green tree that stood in its front yard. The branches of that tree would sway on some unfelt breeze when I drove up, almost as if it was a greeting to an old friend. Maybe it was. As time went on, I found myself spending more and more of my time staring at those waving branches, almost hypnotized by the rhythmic rolling of its green leaves, constantly ebbing and flowing like tides of some strange and distant sea. To my surprise, seeing that tree didn't make me angry or fearful anymore. In a way, I think I missed it. Whether that was a symptom of my growing awareness of myself and what I had done, or some magic of the tree itself, I couldn't say or know. What I did know is that I was growing ever closer to the idea of tearing down the wall I'd put up, of freeing Rachel physically at the very least, and perhaps, just perhaps, asking the tree to take me back instead. I was sitting in my car, wondering at the insanity of these impulses, when sudden motion drew my attention from the tree to the house's porch. The front door had opened, and now Rachel and a large man I didn't recognize were coming out. I felt the barest twinge of jealousy as they made their way off the porch. More than that, I felt a pang of loss, a part of me that had seen freeing Rachel as a path towards some kind of redemption, and now had missed my chance. I watched them forlornly as they headed for the road and began walking toward town, my mind abuzz with questions. Where had that man come from? Who was he? Was Rachel safe with him? The irony of that last question wasn't lost on me, and I felt I could judge the answer even from a distance. there was a comfortable ease to the pair as they walked. Whoever they might be to each other, it made me think of that past life I had so briefly, the easy joy of that love. I lowered my head to the steering wheel. What was I to do now? Would this be enough for me to stop hating myself? Stop coming back to the grave of my past? Could I finally be free? I didn't look up at the tree as I pulled away. The next day I was back. I was doing this for me, not Rachel. And besides, I suspected very little had really changed. The tree wouldn't just release her, and that meant that whatever freedom or life she might have, it was temporary. Even with what I'd told her, she would inevitably lie to herself, tell her that the rules of the tree wouldn't apply to her, that she could run from it or beat it somehow. As with myself, it would take time for that hope to be crushed from her. On one hand, that meant she was still doomed to the fate I'd led her to. On the other, it meant that there was still hope that I could save her from it, and in turn, save some piece of myself. My legs shook as I went back down into the basement for the first time. The air down there seemed thick and stale, and I could hardly think over the pounding of my own heart. Each step was trembling and slow as I crossed to the back room and stared at the hole left behind by Rachel's escape. The idea of stepping past the threshold into my old cell was terrifying, but I ultimately sucked in breath and dove forward, as though diving deep into hostile waters. Perhaps the analogy wasn't inept. Even after all this time, I could feel the strange and alien subterranean world that lay on the other side of that far wall. The inherent anxiety and danger of the worlds that lay beyond. Could I really do it? Even if it would listen to me, even if it would take me back and free Rachel, could I really make myself a prisoner again? I glanced behind to reassure myself that the wall was still broken, that the path out was still clear. It was. The cold fluorescent light of the outer space giving the floor a dull but welcome glow. Despite myself and my best intentions, I stepped back toward that light. I couldn't do this. Of course I couldn't. It was madness. I'd have to learn to live with the guilt, accept that I had the right to be happy, move on, and trust that Rachel could eventually figure a way out of the mess I'd brought her into. I was dripping sweat by the time I made it outside again. As I left the porch, I vowed to myself that it was for the last time. I couldn't blame the tree any longer. I needed to take responsibility for myself. Stop being so weak. Leave the past behind. The words sounded hollow as I thought them. And 3 days later, I was back in my spot, staring at the house again. Within a week, I started talking to the tree in the yard, though it never seemed to notice. It took time, but before the year was done, I was making trips back down into the basement like I had today, begging for Rachel's freedom some days, and other days just my own. I often wondered if I was just insane, if the idea was to comfort me. Better that than all the horrors I knew in my heart of hearts to be true. Through all these months, the tree never responded to me, and there were many times where I left the house with some paltry sense of satisfaction. I had tried, after all, tried to fix things, tried to atone, and it wouldn't answer me. I should take it as a sign that I was truly free of its bindings, and that I should similarly free myself from the cold iron grip of my guilt. Enough was enough, I'd tell myself. Time to stop this for good. And then I'd go back, just like I did today, begging for it to open the wall, to talk to me, to give me a sign, even making an offering of sorts in the form of my dearest possession, the pen John gave me so long ago, as though returning it to that terrible place would show the tree I was truly ready to make amends. But it all amounted to nothing. And as before, I left angry and discouraged and disgusted with myself. I slammed the door as I got back into my car. I still parked far away, but the walk back had done little to cool my temper. I was just wasting my time with this. Nothing was ever going to... A car was coming up the driveway fast. It was a small brown sedan with the left side severely dented and scraped, perhaps recently given the precarious nature of some of the trim. As the car skidded to a braking halt, I felt my confusion turn to alarm as I saw who was leaving the vehicle. If I wasn't mistaken, it was the same man I'd seen leave with Rachel nearly a year before. And yes, there she was too, though she had been pulled out through the driver's seat and didn't look at all like a willing passenger. What was this? Was this man carrying her back to the tree? Had she tried to trick him into taking her place and he somehow figured it out? None of this made sense. The man was much larger than her, and it took little effort for him to pull her up and onto the front porch despite her resistance. And she was resisting, but only a little. Did she have a plan? Or was this somehow different than I thought? Maybe I was misreading everything, and even if I wasn't, did I really want to get involved? They were apparently arguing on the porch about something. Perhaps it was her copy of the key, for he suddenly turned and kicked the door open with one hard blow before dragging her out of view. No, something was very wrong. I should help, shouldn't I? Or should I leave it to the tree to sort out? Surely it would protect her. Or if not, wouldn't that bring a resolution on its own? I grimaced at my train of thought. I needed to decide what to do, because if I didn't, I had a feeling it was going to be decided without me. Maybe I could just... Another car came roaring down the driveway. This one a small SUV with damage on both sides and a broken headlight and grille. It slowed as it drew near the house, and a man jumped out. It looked like the same man that had just drugged Rachel inside the house. He looked around the first vehicle before seeming to notice the open front door on the porch. I was fascinated as I watched him. Maybe the distance and my own imagination was playing tricks on me, but it was the same man, wasn't it? What did it all mean? I suddenly noticed movement in my vision's periphery and cut my eyes to the giant towering over the overgrown lawn. The ghost tree's branches weren't lazily drifting in some phantom breeze any longer. Now its arms waved and whipped frantically as if its frothing leaves heaved and tossed like waves meant more for sinking than sailing. Something new was happening, something new and dangerous, and I could feel the weight and electricity of it in the air. The storm wasn't coming any longer. It was here. I called Rachel's number for the 10th time as I rounded the hill and our place came into view. I just got the voicemail again, and the sound of that past version of her speaking made my guts clench as I pulled into the driveway and braked hard enough to make the tires squeal slightly as they came to rest. That voice, her but not her, there but not there, like the voice from a memory, a piece of something lost, a ghost. Gritting my teeth, I jumped out of the car and started looking for signs of anything out of place as I ran toward the house. Outside, everything looked fine. I tried to tell myself that I was overreacting, or maybe I had gotten so sick that it had warped my thinking, made me paranoid. Inside was chaos. Furniture was tipped over, several things lay broken on the floor, and a general path of destruction led from the front of the house to the side door I just entered. There had been a fight, or at least a hard struggle. I didn't see any blood, thank God, but part of me knew that meant very little. I'd never seen the other Rachel bleed, and they'd killed her just the same. I searched the house and then the yard before going back inside. I tried her phone again, and this time I could hear it, ringing from the nightstand where she charged it the night before. Oh God, what should I do? I could call the police, but would it help? Given our situation, the odds of the attack not being related to either Solomon or the man who had trapped her in the basement seemed very slim. Still, maybe they could find her before it was too late, before I failed her again. Shaking my head, I stepped back outside. No, now wasn't the time for panic or self-pity. I had to calm down, think about it slowly. Okay, so assuming it wasn't some random attack or kidnapping, it was probably either Solomon or Parrish. Pairing? If it was pairing, why would he take her? Because he wants her to stay trapped with the tree. Where would he take her? Back to the house seemed the obvious choice. Back to her prison. Swallowing, I forced myself to go on. If it was Solomon, he might not know about the house at all. And he could have taken her anywhere. But he would have had to find some way to come over to this world. And I didn't know any other way than the tunnels of the ghost tree. I also didn't know why he'd still want me if he'd found the tree, but maybe he didn't. Maybe he'd found out about my Rachel somehow and thought he could do to her what he had done to the version of her in my old world. Rage and terror swept through me hard, and I leaned against the wall for support as I sucked in big breaths and tried to steady myself. Either way, the house was a good option, whether to trap Rachel there or to get back to the tunnels. I needed to go and try and catch them, stop whoever had her and get her back before it was too late. Running to the car, I felt a song reverberating from somewhere deep inside. It was a fragile melody full of fear and excitement, and something stronger than both underneath. Pulling back out onto the road, I stomped the gas and shot forward, my eyes constantly scanning for any sign of Rachel or those who might have taken her. The other thing I'd heard in the song grew stronger as I turned toward the house. It was a song of a promise or some kind of fulfillment, though I couldn't tell if it was good or bad yet. That's when I thought of a story my mom had told me once, about how she'd been in a twister one time when she lived in Oklahoma. Everyone lived through it, but she said it was a near thing. Tore the roof and half of a room off the end of the house. Just a few feet over, and it would have gotten them too. Funny thing was, they'd had time to get away. Flat as the land was there, they'd seen the tornado from miles away, but it seemed so distant that it was more of a frightening curiosity than anything else. Until it turned their way, they heard a sound like a freight train bearing down on them. That had been her point. She told me to always watch out for the storm. To watch out, and if I see it, get away fast. Because by the time you can hear it, well, by then it's already too late. My hands were slick with sweat and blood as I gripped the wheel. I had to catch back up. I knew they were headed to the house now, or at least had been before I caught up the first time. But I'd lost at least 10 minutes slamming into the tree and getting back onto the road. Even though I hadn't recognized the car, I knew it was them as soon as I saw a vehicle ahead. Rachel seemed to sense me too, turning to stare back at me, her face ghostly in the shadow of the car's interior. I had to make them stop, but how? And what if it caused whoever had her to do something to her? Gritting my teeth, I pushed what ifs and fears out of my crowded head. There was no time to think slow now. All I was doing was giving them time to react or outsmart me. I had to stop them while I could, because I might not get another chance. I shifted to the oncoming lane as the front of my car edged up further. The driver had sped up too, but I was still catching up. I thought about hitting their back wheel, trying to make them spin out, but both sides of the road were lined with trees and we were going over 90. I had a horrible image of Rachel's side of the car slamming into a trunk, killing her. But up ahead, there was a curve, and if a car didn't make the turn, they'd shoot out into an overgrown field instead of the woods. She could still get hurt, but I didn't see anything big for them to hit, and it should slow the car down enough for it to stop safely. I just had to get up closer and force the car to stay straight at the curve, taking us both out into the weeds that lay beyond. Pressing the gas pedal as far as it would go, the engine whined as I crept up further. I could see now that a large man was driving the other car and... oh God, he looked like me. How? The other car suddenly pumped their brakes with a squeal, dropping back even as the driver swerved the front of his car into the back of mine. The effect was immediate. I began to spin out, pinwheeling past the front of the car as the momentum slung me into the trees. There was a moment of tremendous noise and a flash of pain as my head slammed into the side window during the flight off the road. This was followed by an even louder bang as I struck the tree, side and front airbags hammering my head as I slipped into darkness. My first thought on waking up was that I could feel my heartbeat in my head. I was in the car, deflated airbags draped across my shoulder and lap. There had been an accident. Rachel, he still had her. Some other me, someone made to look like it, had taken her, and now I'd lost them. I went to get out of the car, but the door wouldn't budge. Looking past the airbag, I saw why. The car had slammed into a large pine tree right where the door was. It was a miracle I wasn't hurt worse, but it wouldn't matter if I couldn't get the car back on the road and going again. My left eye burned as something dripped into it. Reaching up, I felt a ragged cut at the edge of my forehead, pulsing out a thin trickle of blood as I wiped at it. It didn't matter. Reaching for the key in the ignition, I turned it to off and put the car in park. I waited a moment, said a silent prayer, and tried cranking the car again. It started immediately. Heart hammering, I threw the SUV into drive and hit the gas. There was a groaning squeal next to me as the metal of the door tried to free itself from the tree, followed by a lower scraping sound as I ground the side of the car along the bark. Everything lurched to a stop. I looked out the intact driver's side mirror and saw the tree had made its way to the bumper, where it had snagged the edge. Holding the wheel tightly, I stomped the gas harder and heard a banging screech as the edge bumper buckled enough for me to shoot forward. I slowed down only a little as I steered toward the embankment and the road's edge. Glancing at the dash clock, I gauged I'd been out for almost 10 minutes. Too long, too fucking long. The tires squealed as they bit the asphalt and I shot forward. There was no sign of the other car, but I knew where they were headed. At least, I hoped I did. But what if they weren't at the house? What if you've lost her again? I shook my head against the voice, my own voice, trying to focus instead on the soft music echoing from my core. This was still the right path, and I would find her and get her back wherever they took her. And God help me if they tried to stop me. I took the steps into the house in a single bound, only forcing myself to slow as I went to step inside. I knew they were here. The car was here, and they couldn't have gotten far on foot. Besides, it was clear now they were here for either the tree or the tunnel, and there'd been no sign of them in the yard. Still, I had to be careful of an ambush. Pushing the door open quickly, I glanced around inside before heading in. I didn't know the layout of the house, but that was all right. I was pretty sure where they were headed, if they were still here at all. That was my biggest fear at this point, that they'd made it to the tunnels, and despite the thing inside me, I wouldn't be able to find them again. I'd lose them among all the paths and worlds that lay beyond them. My chest tightened with fear at the thought. I had to hurry. I found the door to the basement and opened it quietly. The lights were on down there. I couldn't say for sure, but I think Rachel had turned those off when we left last time. Someone else could have been inside, of course, but no. I heard something. They were down there. A surge of nervous relief twisted my stomach in knots as I started down the stairs. I should have brought a weapon. I'd thought about it in the car when it did me no good. And I hadn't wanted to take the time to search for one upstairs when he could be down here killing her or carrying her through the wall. I flexed my hands as I reached the bottom of the stairs. It was okay. I would stop them either way. I glanced around the room. There was no sign of anything out of place. The door to the second room, the room with the hidden prison cell, was open. Cool glow of fluorescent light pouring from the opening. That's where they'd been. Swallowing, I stepped to the doorway and looked inside. My plan had to be cautious, to go slow and try to spot them before charging in. But then I saw her. She was propped up next to the broken brick wall, her face bloody and her eyes closed. A memory suddenly gripped me, the twin of this beautiful face, long dead and drifting in that hidden, evil place where they'd kept her prisoner until they killed her. No, don't! I let out a whoosh of air as I felt the knife slamming into my stomach. I started to reach for it, but a hand was already pulling it free, only to slam it in again. Looking up, I found a hard but familiar face smiling back at me. I could already feel my head beginning to swim as fire spread across my belly. "They told me you'd be harder to get than this." He smirked as he yanked the knife free, shoving me against the doorframe as my legs began to buckle. "But then again, they told me to bring you back. To bring the thing you've gotten you back." He looked at the knife in his hand thoughtfully before pointing its tip at me. "The thing is, I think they'll be satisfied with the woman. She's the same as the one they had, right? And if I kill you," he stepped forward, a cold smile on his face, "then I'll be the last man standing."
I hear the voice as though in a dream, familiar and yet not, comforting and terrifying at the same time. Why? It's Thomas, talking about something I don't understand. My head is killing me, and if only he could stop sounding so wrong and... Oh God. I had a flicker of a memory. Not Thomas. Someone that looked like him, taking me back to the house, to the tree, and me arguing with him, trying to convince him that he shouldn't do this while looking for an opening to attack or escape. But he either sensed my growing rebellion or decided it was time to shut me up for whatever he had planned. And as soon as we reached the bottom of the basement stairs, he'd been on me, holding a cloth to my face while wrapping his other arm tightly around my waist. I tried to break free, but it was no use. Thomas or not, he was big and strong enough to keep the cloth in place until the world slipped away. I opened my eyes, recoiling slightly against the brutal onslaught of the light as the room burns itself into view. I was next to the hole leading to the prison room, and there was not Thomas. And there... Oh no. I knew my Thomas right away, and seeing both of them together just made their differences all the more obvious. The man standing above Thomas has a tension to him, a coil of anger stretched tight across some chasm where his heart should be. His back is to me, but I can tell by his posture that he's readying himself to attack, even as Thomas tries to get up. He's going to kill him. I feel something lurch in my chest as I catch a glimpse of Scarlet on Thomas's stomach, between the other man's legs. He's already hurt. I've got to help him. If I wasn't so fucking out of it and weak feeling. But I have to do something. I can try to distract him. But what if that isn't enough? I need a weapon, maybe the leg from the bed I was using. But what if I can't hit him hard enough? Or... Fuck. Can I even stand? I have to hurry, or it's going to be... I see an unfamiliar glint of metal shining out from on top of the chest in the prison room. What is that? Where did it come from? I pull myself closer. Thomas was talking to the man now, but I couldn't focus on what was being said. I had to make my limbs work, quickly and quietly, try to reach that glinting bit of silver, before it was too late.
I searched my double's face, looking for some sign of doubt or remorse. Some kind of... what was the word? It didn't matter. Nothing mattered anymore if I couldn't find a way to stop him, or at least make him leave Rachel alone. Just take me. I won't fight you. They sent you from me, not her, right? I was guessing at this based on what he said, but I could tell by his eyes that I'd struck a nerve. He may be working with Solomon or whoever else, but he was still afraid of them. I had a moment of hope that I'd start to change his mind, but then his expression hardened again. Sorry, but no gratis. You'd be unconscious or dead in the first few minutes, and I'd much rather carry her than you. His face brightened. Besides, they really just want what's in your gut. He pointed the bloody knife at my stomach. And I can just cut that out of you, can't I? This wasn't going to work. I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. Rachel. Maybe if I kept him focused on me, it would give her time to escape into the tunnel. The tree might protect her there, keep him from getting in at all. I just had to keep his attention on me and not look in her direction. Talk to him, get him close maybe. I could feel my strength fading as icy cold slowly spread out from my stomach. I wasn't as weak as I was acting, not yet at least. You don't have to do this. You're me, right? Another me. Think about that. It's like killing a brother or killing yourself. We're the same. He snorted. You think they didn't prepare me for your begging? We're not the same. They trained me, changed. The man glanced away, and for a moment, he looked different, uncertain, and haunted. They changed me, I think. He shook his head, dispelling the brief doubt that had clouded his eyes. It doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is surviving, taking what's mine. What you've stolen from me just by existing. His smile widened. You see, killing you will solve pretty much all of my problems. I looked down to see Rachel, teeth gritted as she pulled a piece of metal free from his leg and slammed it against his ankle. Howling, he turned toward her, kicking Rachel in the shoulder as he pinwheeled backward toward the wall next to me. I didn't hesitate. Reaching out as far as I could, I grabbed his good ankle and yanked hard, sending him to the concrete floor with a grunting whoosh of air. I couldn't waste any time now. My limbs felt loose and spongy. The world was swimming as I pushed myself up the wall to a shaky standing position. I looked at Rachel. She was in pain, but seemed okay. No time to check on her now. Forcing myself forward, I cradled my oozing stomach with one hand as I held out the other for balance. No time to go slow. I had to get it before it was too late. The sledgehammer was where we left it, propped against the inner wall of the secret bedroom. It barely moved when I tried to pick it up. It was almost impossibly heavy. But no, I could move it. I would. I had to. Taking the other hand away from my stomach, I gripped the handle with both hands. It was slick with my blood now, but I could at least drag it out of the hole and towards the other version of me. He was already rolling over, trying to get to his feet again. Once he did, even with a hurt leg, I didn't know if I could stop him. In the moments between moments, I saw what I had to do, thought slow so I could act fast. Gripping the handle tighter, I yanked the sledgehammer forward and up, using my whole body's momentum even as my limbs began to go numb and my stomach felt like it was ripping wide. There was no time to think about aiming or worry about failing. I was just doing what needed to be done. What would be done. It could be no other way. The iron head of the hammer swung through its arc, and even when it struck the back of the other Thomas's head, it barely slowed. Instead, it drove him back to the ground with a sickeningly wet crunch that changed to a pulpier sound as his skull broke open on the floor. The vibration from the impact shook the hammer from my grip, but it didn't matter. He was dead, and Rachel was okay, and I gasped as I hit the ground. What was... Rachel was over me now, her eyes filled with tears.
You're going to be okay. I'm going to find something to put on your stomach and find a phone and...
I reached up and touched her face. No time. Her eyes widened.
No, there is. I'll be right back, just...
She trailed off as she started to stand. I grabbed her arm with a hand that felt strangely disconnected. Everything was so odd now. I didn't feel like I had a body, or if I did, it seemed far away. But my mind, I felt like I saw everything clearer, like I could think more clearly than I ever had. I distantly felt that stranger's hand give her arm a weak squeeze. The tunnel! Get us to the tunnel!
I felt numb as I helped Thomas into the tunnel. I'd never worried the wall wouldn't open for us. And my fears of traveling down those never-ending, glowing paths seemed a small thing now. Because everything was eclipsed by the stark terror that had seized my heart. It had begun when I saw the thickening stain at Thomas's stomach, but it had taken firmer hold when I looked up into his face. He was dying, and he knew it. I didn't have to question the logic of going into the tunnel. I already knew the tree had some ability to stave off hunger and aging, so the idea that it could choose to sustain or even heal someone wasn't that big of a leap. Beyond that, Thomas had his intuitions, and whether it was from the thing those bastards had put in him or something else, I knew they couldn't be discounted. So we went into the tunnel, Thomas helping me as best he could. He pushed himself along the ground as I pulled him, and once we were inside, I lifted his shirt to look at his wounds. God, that fucker had almost gutted him. Taking off my jacket, I pressed it gently but firmly against the wounds, trying to slow the flow of blood until the tree could perform its miracle. If it would, or could. Thomas seemed to pass out for a minute, his breathing growing first rougher and then more even, before he suddenly opened his eyes again, giving me a weak smile. He nodded.
It still hurts a lot, but it feels a bit better. See how it looks.
Wincing, I peeled back the soaked jacket to look at his stomach. There wasn't much fresh blood, but the wounds weren't healing, and I could see the spots where bits of torn insides were visible. Swallowing, I met his eyes. It's better, but not healed. I don't know if it's going to. I glanced back toward the brick wall that had reformed after we'd entered the tunnel. I think I should go get help. Maybe the tunnel can keep you going until I bring someone back. Thomas was already shaking his head, and I frowned at him, my voice growing sharp. Well, I'm not going to fucking let you die! You're not going to fucking die! The anger was gone as soon as it had come, taking my breath and composure with it. Tearing up, I shook my head. We have to fix this! Thomas put a cool hand on my arm.
We will. We need to go deeper in. The thing in me is pulling me deeper in, and I trust it. Whatever its reasons, it doesn't want me to die either.
I took his hand and squeezed it. Sweetie, I don't think you can go any further. You're going to tear open worse than you already are. He smiled again and returned the squeeze.
It'll be okay. The tree can't fix me on its own, I don't think, but it's trying to get us to where I can be helped.
Puffing out a trembling breath, I glanced at his stomach before meeting his gaze again. Are you sure? He nodded.
I think so, yeah.
Thomas was stronger now, but still unsteady on his feet, and I could tell that every breath and step was growing more painful. We walked slowly, and I let him set the pace and path as we went. He never slowed or seemed unsure of which turns and branches to take. but I could tell that it was taking a toll on him. I'd periodically ask if he wanted to stop and rest, but he'd always just shake his head. I understand. We never said it, but we both knew he was running out of time. When we turned a corner and saw a brick wall, I felt him relax a little. Glancing up at him, my chest tightened. He looked pale and waxy, his skin slick with sweat from our journeying through the tunnels. Despite trying to sound calm, I could hear the tremble in my voice when I asked if this was it. He nodded.
Yeah, I think it is.
The wall dissolved as we walked forward into the darkness. As soon as we crossed the threshold into what I assumed was another basement, Thomas began collapsing against me, the weight of him pulling us both down. I managed to slow his descent to the floor, easing him down onto the concrete floor. I didn't have my phone, but after a moment of feeling in his pockets, I found Thomas's and turned on its flashlight. He was alive, but unconscious, and I could already see fresh blood welling from his stomach wounds again. God damn it. I should have had him wait in the tunnel. He wasn't thinking straight, and now I had to drag him back in and hope it was enough. And then... No. I needed to calm down. I needed to trust in him and trust myself to help him. There was still time. Sucking in a shaking breath, I panned the light around the room. It was a version of the basement, though it was empty. No prison room or furniture or anything else. Well, that wasn't entirely true. Near where Thomas lay, I could see something scratched into the floor. A number. 71. Oh no. Fuck no. I felt a new wave of fear roll through me. I knew what this place was. A glowing cave with a rotting version of the tree, and something terrible lurking in the dark. Something that had spoken to me. Asked me something. What was it?
What do you offer as tribute for your need, traveler?
Suddenly, everything snapped into place. It was offering a trade, and if it was still up there, maybe it was what could save Thomas. Whatever it took, whatever it wanted, I'd give it gladly if it would save him. I leaned over and kissed him in the dark, whispering how much I loved him, before standing and heading to the other room and the stairs. I could see the cold, blue light as I took the steps quickly, and by the time I stepped out the front door, I was already shuddering from both the chill air and my own fear. But it was all right. I could do this. For him, I could. My throat burned with the cold as I called out, "I'm here! I want to offer tribute for my need." For several moments, there was nothing. I looked around. The house was as I remembered it, though this version of the tree looked even worse than before, as though the corruption at its roots had worked its poison through the trunk and was now spreading out to the branches beyond. On the far side of this massive cavern, I could see tunnels trailing off and... Wait. There. I thought I saw twin blue embers glowing in the distant black. I took a nervous step forward and was about to call again when a hand fell on my shoulder. Letting out a scream, I spun around even as I stumbled back. It was a man. A man a bit bigger than Thomas, though leaner and much older, holding up his hands placatingly. He offered me a tentative smile, set in a hard, unreadable face.
Didn't mean to startle you, but you need to listen to me. You don't want to deal with that thing out there.
I frowned at him. I don't have a choice. Thomas is dying. I have to get him help. His face softened slightly.
What's wrong with him?
I swallowed. He's been stabbed. A lot. I heard the fresh tremor in my voice as I pointed toward the house. And he's going to die in there if I don't get him help. I was thinking maybe the thing that lives here could do it. His expression darkened for a moment, and I felt a new thrill of fear. This wasn't a normal man. I didn't know if he was bad or not, but he had an aura of dangerousness that set me on edge. Studying me for a moment, he seemed to make a decision.
Perhaps it could help but you wouldn't like the cost.
He hooked a thumb at the strap of the backpack he wore.
I have medical supplies in here. They were meant for someone else, but I don't mind using some of them on your friend if you'll let me.
I glanced back out across the tunnel. The blue lights were brighter now. Maybe a bit closer. I'd like that, but I'm telling you, a first aid kit isn't going to cut it. He's dying. His expression didn't change as his eyes bored into mine.
I understand. I still think I can help him.
Taking a step forward, he put out his hand.
My name's Patrick, and I'm a surgeon.
Thomas didn't stir as we approached, and I felt my stomach lurch at the growing pool of blood on and around his stomach. He was still breathing, but in the harsh glow of the phone's light, he looked faded and pale. The man named Patrick stepped past me, using his own flashlight to highlight Thomas as he checked him with a calm efficiency that was both comforting and maddening. He had to hurry, had to help him, had to...
Get your light over here. Shine it on his stomach.
I jumped slightly and stepped around to get a better angle with the light. I could barely breathe as I pushed out the question I'd been wanting to ask since the man started checking him. How is he? Patrick didn't pause in his examination of the stab wounds in Thomas's stomach.
Not good. His pulse is off and he's losing too much blood. He's not in hemorrhagic shock yet, but he's heading that way. I need to work on him now, but not down here.
He paused and looked up at me.
We need to carry him upstairs, outside to where that light is. I have to perform a laparotomy, and the lights we have down here are insufficient.
Standing up, he gestured to Thomas's feet.
We need to be gentle moving him. Try not to bend or compress his abdomen more than we can help. So grab his feet and help me get him up there.
I took a step forward, but then stopped. Wait, maybe we can do it in the tunnel. Patrick gave me a confused frown. We got here through a tunnel that appears in this back wall. I walked to the wall, but nothing happened. I felt panic surging through me as I turned back to him. It's not... the tree, it has to let us in. But the tunnel stops the bleeding and can help him. The fear I felt boiled into anger as I turned back to the wall and slapped my hand against it. Let us fucking in, you piece of shit! He's going to die because of you! You fucking let us! I trailed off as I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned back to see Patrick looking at me somberly. His gaze sharp, but not unkind in the ambient glow of my light.
I believe you, but it's not working right now, and we don't have time to wait. So get his feet.
I tensed at every bump and jostle as we carried him upstairs, but it went much smoother and quicker than I'd expected. Despite his apparent age, Patrick was very strong and sure-footed, and in a couple of minutes, Thomas was laid out on the front porch as the doctor handed me his flashlight. He immediately started digging in the bag he carried, laying out a strip of paper and then spreading out a line of medical supplies.
The stuff I have is limited. I brought enough for first aid, simple emergency, surgery, and initial treatment of burns or infection. But my space was at a premium, as I had to make room for food, water, and other supplies as well.
He paused and looked up at me.
Pay attention to this.
He glanced back at a row of tools and began pointing at them.
Scalpel, forceps, hemostats, syringe, retractors, needle, PGA suture, PDS suture.
He began rolling up his sleeves as he met my eyes again.
You keep the lights where I tell you, hand me things as I ask for them. I'm about to open up these wounds more so I can see the degree of damage and try to repair them. I'll likely need you to hold open some of these wounds with a retractor at times. Got it?
I puffed out a shaky breath and nodded. I'll do whatever you need. He offered me a smile.
Good. Let's get started.
Time slipped to and fro as he worked, crawling and rushing at the same time. I was still terrified that Thomas might not make it, but that fear was in the background now. Part of that was due to seeing Patrick work. He moved with a quick grace and self-assuredness that told me he knew what he was doing, even if I didn't know myself. But a lot of it was my focus on making sure I did my part. lit what he needed lit, handed him what he asked for, pulled back an opening when it was required. Despite the cold air in the cavern, I could feel sweat running down my back as Patrick suddenly paused and looked at me.
There's something in here. Not at the wound sites, but close by. It could be a surgical implant, but it feels irregular. You're sure it was a knife he was stabbed with, right?
I swallowed and nodded.
And no signs of it breaking or looking like it left something in him?
When I shook my head, he frowned slightly.
Any idea what it could be?
I glanced past him to the corrupted version of the tree sitting some distance away. Yeah, the tree. The tree over there is part of a tree on a lot of different worlds. Maybe all of them. A year ago, some bad people had Thomas, and they put a piece of the tree in him. That might be what you feel. He studied me for a moment before giving a slight nod.
I see. I still don't think I should.
He broke off as Thomas lifted his arm weakly.
Take it out, please. It's time for it to...
His arm slipped back down as his eyes closed with a flutter. Patrick looked at him and then back to me.
I can try, but given his other injuries, it may be better to leave well enough alone if it's been in him this long without...
It's killing him. I was staring at Thomas now, my words sounding more calm and sure than I felt. I think we've both known it for a while, but I also think he knew he needed to keep it for some reason. Maybe for now, I don't know. Either way, it needs to come out. I met Patrick's eyes. Please, if you can get it out without hurting him worse, do it. He seemed to consider it for a moment, and then nodded.
He's stable now. He had 4 peritoneal penetrations, one of which punctured his liver and 2 more in his colon. But the sutures should hold well enough for the time being. My main concern is putting his body through more than is necessary. But it sounds like this is necessary.
Patrick turned back to Thomas.
Hold up the light. Let's see if we can get this thing out.
Not trying to be nosy, but why are you in here? We were sitting on the steps of the back porch, looking out at the shadowy cavern that served as the yard of the house in this place. Being there made my skin crawl. And not just because of the corrupted tree off to one side, or just the overall strangeness of being in this cold and glowing cave. It was the constant feeling of being watched. That itch in the back of my brain that said unseen eyes were on us. Maybe even the eyes of the thing that had spoke to me when I was here before. Either way, I had the impression that Patrick had come here willingly and prepared, sitting in the chilling dark with him as we waited for Thomas to wake. I couldn't help but wonder who he really was and what could bring him here.
I'm, odd as it may sound, just passing through.
He glanced at me with a small smile.
There's a cave. It looks much like any other cave from the outside, but it's not. It leads here, and from here it leads on to another place. A place where I believe my grandson is trapped.
My eyes had widened slightly at the mention of a cave entrance. Do you think we'd be better off trying to get Thomas out through the cave? I know the tunnels seem to help him, but if it's close... I trailed off as he began shaking his head.
It's hard to say in here, but if I had to guess, that entrance is 10 miles or more back.
He pointed a thumb behind us to where Thomas lay.
Those sutures will last for a while, but the less movement the better, and he'll be weak from losing all that blood, that and the pain. If your tunnels work as well as you say, that's probably your best bet.
He puffed out a breath as he turned to meet my eyes.
And I want to be clear with you, Rachel. I was very happy to help. Given the odds of us meeting at all in this place, I tend to think I was meant to help in some way. And I'll stay until we know he's awake and still stable. But beyond that, you're on your own. There have already been too many sacrifices to get me here. Put me on a path to where I can possibly help Jason, my grandson. I can't squander all of that now.
Rubbing his mouth, he let out a small sigh.
I hope you understand.
Reaching over, I gave his arm a squeeze. I do just about anything to save the man laying back there. And he already has done just about everything to save me. So I get it. And thank you. I don't know if it's fate or the tree or what else that brought us into this fucking cave at the same time, but I'll never be able to repay what... Tribute. I froze mid-sentence, and I felt Patrick tense under my hand. Though the word had been in my head, he had heard it too. Heart pounding, I looked out at the cavern, hoping to see nothing, or, at most, those strange glowing flames in the distance. Instead, I saw a horror moving toward us across the cave floor. Its head was like a skull, stretched long and wrong, with pointed cheeks holding twin indigo flames above a crisscross mouth full of glass needles. Pale, almost translucent skin that seemed to swim with spots of darker color glowed with the blue shimmer in the light of the cavern, stretching down from its head to a torso that was thin but muscled, and long fingered hands that seemed to have bits of black rot or bone jutting from their tips. It was an impossible monster, and it made even less sense as my gaze went lower. The torso ended in ragged strips of torn flesh, and from that ruined mound, 4 razor-sharp sickles of bone curved down, flashing and digging into the stone floor as it worked its way toward us. I started to stand up, wanting to grab Thomas and drag him toward the basement, but Patrick grabbed my hand and gave it a squeeze. When I looked at him, he shook his head slightly, never taking his gaze off the creature that had come to stop a few feet in front of us.
Do you come to offer tribute for your need, or safe passage?
Its blazing eyes were hard to read, but I got the distinct impression it was focused on me, not Patrick. I didn't know how to respond, or if I should even try. When it spoke again, its voice, which was already icy and hard, was almost painfully cold.
Or are you merely a trespasser?
I had to think. It had mentioned safe passage. If I had to offer it something to get us out of here safe, I would. And if that wasn't good enough, I'd offer more just to get Thomas back into the tunnel. If that didn't work, then I thought Patrick's scalpel was still back there behind us. The thing towering over us had to be at least 10 feet tall, and I knew I had little chance of actually killing whatever it was. If nothing else, maybe I could distract it long enough for Patrick to get Thomas and get away. But first, I tried to talk to it. What do you want for safe passage for us? For all of us? Its eyes flickered lower for a moment before brightening again.
What is your offering for passage?
God damn it.
I looked over at Patrick when he spoke, surprised to see both anger and sadness in his expression as he stood up slowly.
The passage that was brought for me included safe passage for friends of my choosing.
He turned and gestured to me and then to Thomas on the porch.
These 2 are those friends.
He met my eyes briefly before turning back to the monster.
Part of our bargain, I extend my safe passage to them.
The creature's eyes flared as if focused on the old man. When it spoke again, its voice was threaded with poison.
Very well, traveler. Safe passage is granted, and our bargain is complete. None of you will be harmed, so long as you don't tarry overlong.
With that, it turned and moved back across the cavern, disappearing into one of the dark openings at the far end. I puffed out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding as I turned and gave Patrick a hug. Thank you so much! I don't know what it wanted, but I was ready to give it whatever just to get you 2 out of here. Letting out a shaky laugh, I pulled back. Patrick was smiling at me, but his eyes were troubled. I frowned. That was meant for him, wasn't it? Jason? He nodded slightly.
It was, or I thought it was. Now I see it was meant for you 2 instead.
Rubbing his face, he gave a slight shrug.
No need to worry. If I find him, when I find him, we'll figure out another way back.
Patrick glanced toward the dark where the monster had gone.
For now, We need to hurry. I think it may keep to the letter of its bargain, but I don't trust it any further. I'll help you get Thomas back into the tunnels if it'll open this time, and then I'll be on my way. First things first, let's see if we can wake...
I'm up.
I jumped at the sound of Thomas's voice. It was soft and hoarse, and one of the best sounds I'd ever heard. Turning to look, I saw he was not only awake, but was already sitting up with a wince. "Careful, go slow." I moved to his side and put my arm around him, kissing the side of his head as I supported him. Looking up at Patrick, I raised an eyebrow. "Should he be moving like this?" He nodded.
He should be okay to walk if he's careful and you help him. Just don't waste time getting back home and getting him into a hospital. Magic tunnel or not, he needs more help than he's gotten.
Patrick held out his hand to Thomas.
Let's see if you can keep your feet.
The wall fell away before we even reached the cell room this time, as though the tree was as anxious as I was for Thomas to be back inside. Or maybe it just cared about what we carried. Thomas had insisted that we use the remains of his bloody shirt to wrap up the thing Patrick had removed from him and bring it along. I felt its weight inside of my jacket, a small piece of red wood covered in bits of new green growth, and shuddered at the dread coiled in my stomach. The cutting was just another reminder that we weren't done with the tree yet, and it wasn't done with us. Still, for the moment, I was grateful. While I was worried with every step Thomas took that he might collapse or start bleeding again. So far, he seemed alert and, if not strong, at least not so weak he couldn't walk. When we reached the threshold of the tunnel, Patrick let him go and stepped back. He was looking past us at the soft, golden light coming from the tunnel that had appeared.
That's really something. Do you know how to get back home?
I frowned slightly. Not exactly, but between the two of us, we'll figure it out. I used the light on Thomas's phone to highlight the number etched into the concrete behind Patrick. The tunnels go to different worlds, different versions of this house. Some of them have numbers. This one's 71. We'll keep looking until we find number 1 again. Patrick raised his eyebrows.
I see. Well, I don't know if your home is even the same as mine then. But if it is, and if we all make it back there, feel free to contact me sometime and let me know how you are.
He handed me a wrinkled card that said Jaeger Solutions in thin black lettering.
The number isn't good anymore, but the email address still works.
He started to step away.
But you two get going, and I'll do the...
Thomas suddenly stepped forward and embraced Patrick. At first, I thought he was giving the man a hug for saving him, but then I realized Thomas was speaking in his ear. I couldn't make out most of it, but I thought I heard a number. 26. Patrick nodded to Thomas as they stepped apart, and then gave me a last smile before turning and heading away in the direction of the stairs. His expression had been troubled at the end, but I could ask Thomas what he told him later. For the time being, getting out of this place and into the tunnel was more important. Within moments of crossing into that golden light, I could feel Thomas growing stronger. He still leaned on me for support, but more for balance than anything. And more than once I had to tell him to slow down and take it easy as he picked up the pace. "Do you know where you're going?" I tried to keep the hope out of my voice. I had managed to get back to our world from 71 before, and I could do it again. But I had no illusions that it would be a quick or error-free process. "Do you still have your feelings about things? Without the cutting inside you, I mean." He stopped and smiled down at me. Even with the improvement, his face was slick with sweat after a few minutes of pain and exertion.
No, I don't think so. But I do have something. I don't know. It's like I'm guessing, but I know I'm guessing right.
Thomas frowned.
That sounds dumb, but I think it's right.
I nodded. "Well, let's just take it slow and see. The main thing is you don't overdo it and we get you to a hospital as soon as we can." Squeezing me with the arm I was supporting, he nodded.
I'm okay. I think I know where we need to go.
We kept walking, and every time we came to a turn or branching path, Thomas paused only a moment before picking one and continuing on. As time passed, I could feel the weight of him increasing again. He was wearing himself out, and I didn't know that he couldn't do more harm than the tunnel and Patrick's work could mitigate it. I was about to make him stop for a bit and rest when I saw an opening in the distance. I glanced at him. Is that it? He grinned at me and nodded.
Yes, this is where we need to go.
Thomas picked up his speed again, and this time, I let him. We'd have to be careful when we crossed the threshold. I didn't want him to collapse again. But we'd get out, get to the car, and I'd drive us into town to the This wasn't the basement. It wasn't a basement at all. I'd been here before. A large chamber of roots with a burned pedestal of branches in the middle. What Phil, or Justin, had called the heart room. I stopped and looked at Thomas. He didn't look surprised or disappointed, and his eyes were clear as he looked around the room. I could hear the fear in my voice when I spoke. This isn't the way out. This is the wrong place. A chill of recognition shot up my spine as a voice sounded from behind us. Phil's voice. Justin's voice.
On the contrary, Rachel, you're exactly where you need to be.
Med bonusen, ja.
I could see fear and anger in
Hello.
Rachel's face as she stepped in front of me. Her body tensed as she brought her hand up.
Hallo.
Something flashed there.